Welcome back to PoliticKING. I'm Larry King. Renewed controversy over Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh and fallout from the Democratic debates. Lots to talk about with our political panel. Joining me from Washington is Alex Vogel. He previously served as chief counsel to Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist and former general counsel for the Republican Senatorial Committee. And in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Brian Joyce, host of The Brian Joyce Show on talk radio airing on WGOW-FM. Alex, what do you make of the New York Times report of more sexual charges against Justice Kavanaugh?
Well, I think there's a couple of issues. One, I think it's unfortunate how the Times itself has handled this, having to walk back an important part of that story. Given the significance of the people involved and the way his confirmation played out, I would have expected from any paper of record a pretty high threshold to go to print. Again, I think it's unfortunate the way they handled it. As to the underlying political issue and the fallout from that, I mean, look, the reality is Justice Kavanaugh was confirmed. He has a lifetime appointment. He is not going to be impeached, nor is there any reason, in my opinion, to impeach him, based on what I understand from the allegations from the Times story. The larger issue is, for those candidates who are running for president who have decided to make this an issue and talk about it, really right after that Times story with no time for reflection or to understand the facts, only former Vice President Biden, in my opinion, was smart enough to hold back and say that he was troubled as opposed to coming out and saying, oh, he should be impeached. I think that's really irresponsible and calls into question and really threatens how people feel about an important branch of government, and I don't think it's justified.
Brian, what if the stories are true?
Larry, I think this is all much ado about nothing. I think it's silliness. Look, if the Democrats wanted to investigate Brett Kavanaugh, they had their chance. The FBI had their chance to investigate Brett Kavanaugh. If they wanted these allegations to come out, if they wanted them to be investigated at the time, they should have done it when these allegations were on the table, when the investigation was on the table. At this point in the game, it's water under the bridge. Our guest is correct. This is a man who's been confirmed to the Supreme Court. He will be on the Supreme Court for the rest of his life. There is nothing at this point that Democrats can do to change that. Even if they impeach him, what difference does it make? The Senate's not going to follow suit. So look, if Democrats don't like this, if they don't like the rules to the game, if they wish they could have this Supreme Court seat back, they have an option. In 2020, get behind your candidate the way that Republicans did in 2016. I don't know how many times I have to say this, but Republicans are just so much better at playing this game of politics, especially when it comes to the politics of the Supreme Court. If Democrats do not like the shape of the Supreme Court right now, they have an option, and the option is to vote. Get behind your candidates and vote. If you can take back the White House and take back the Senate, then you have the Supreme Court. Until then, Larry, it's water under the bridge.
As a Democrat, how do you feel the debates are going, Brian? Is anyone clearly in the lead, or do you think it's Joe Biden?
I have to be honest with you, Larry, and I'll make a confession. I'm not watching the debates. I'm not watching the debates because, in my opinion, every one of these candidates is far more qualified for the White House than Donald Trump is. I mean, is that being silly on my part? I don't think it is. Look, there are differences in some of these policies between the Democratic candidates. I would argue that those differences are minimal compared to the differences between all of them and Donald Trump. We have an incompetent man in the White House right now. He's a danger to America. He's a danger to himself. We need to get somebody back in that office. If it's Bernie Sanders, I'll vote for Bernie Sanders. If it's Joe Biden, if it's Elizabeth Warren, if it's Kamala Harris, every one of these candidates is eminently more qualified for the office than Donald Trump. So I don't watch the debates. I know where most of them stand on the issues, and I have far more confidence that every single one of them is more fit for the White House than Donald Trump.
Alex, would you go so far as to agree with that?
Well, I'll agree with this piece. I think most Americans don't watch a lot of the debates. It's interesting to me, there are so many candidates, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but what it does is for the current front runner, Vice President Biden, in a way, the debates are the least important for him. A lot of American voters know him. They know his record. They have an image of him that's fairly well baked in their minds. The real opportunity from a debate perspective is for those candidates who are much farther down in the polls. And unfortunately, what that means is, and this is true when Republicans have big fields with debates as it is with Democrats now, those candidates have to do things to try and make news, and the debates are a great forum to do it. It generally doesn't play terribly well. You saw Kamala Harris went after Joe Biden early on. That was frankly about as well as she's done in this campaign. Once she did that, it was downhill. You saw Julian Castro take on the vice president again. Didn't play terribly well for him. I know there's concern within the Democratic Party about candidates beating each other up. I actually think it's a pretty healthy process. If you're going to survive a full-fledged general election campaign, you need to be able to survive a primary. But again, I think the debates matter a lot more for the lower tier candidates who are looking for that opportunity. Pretty soon, a lot of these folks are going to realize they're not actually running for president. Some of them are running for vice president. Some are running for cabinet slots. Some are running for other offices. They just don't realize it yet. And the debates will play a significant role in what those futures look like. If you attack someone relentlessly who winds up being president, your odds of being his or her pick to be in the cabinet have gone down pretty substantially. So we'll see how that plays out.
All right, Brian, where do you think it all stands? Do you agree that Joe Biden is the leader to be the Democrat?
I think... Yes, I think Joe Biden is where he should be. I think he's rightfully sitting on top of the polls. Look, Larry, we've had this conversation before. The fact is, Joe Biden is an example of a politician who you look at opinion polling going back 10 years, going back to his very beginning as vice president. For the last 10 years, he is consistently polled as the most popular politician in either party, Democrat or Republican, really over the last 8 to 10 years. So he's exactly where he should be. I think he is the right candidate. Democrats on the coasts, liberal Democrats, they need to realize that they have to have a candidate who plays in these Rust Belt states like Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania that they desperately need if they want to have a chance in 2020 to take this White House back. Donald Trump flipped it in 2016, and he'll do it again if Democrats do not choose a candidate who can appeal in those states. Joe Biden is the guy. I do think that there are some other candidates who have great appeal as well, but, my attitude is, why fix something that's not broken? Joe Biden is a guy who appeals to those voters. He has great cross appeal. I would not screw something up. If I were the Democrats, I would not screw something up that's working for them.
How do you see it, Alex?
I agree with that analysis, frankly. Look, the debate going on within the Democratic Party between the progressives and the more moderates, or the more practical, if you will, from an electoral perspective, is, for all the reasons you said, if you want to beat somebody, it's not as if Democrats had a hard time turning out their base voters the last election. What happened was Donald Trump went out and got some people who had historically voted for Democrats in the Rust Belt and convinced them to vote for him. They need to get those people back. You are not going to do that if you go hard left, and whether it's fair, accurate, however you want to describe it, the socialist side of the party, you may motivate a few more people in places that are already overwhelmingly voting Democratic. You are not going to speak to those voters that Donald Trump spoke to, and you need to if you want to be able to be competitive. That's just the realities of the way we structure our presidential elections. How that actually plays out, we'll see. Historically, parties have had to be out of the White House for 8 years before they decide to get practical and focus on the candidate with the best chance who can win. We'll see if that holds here. Democrats are, to be fair, really energized across the spectrum about this president, and we'll see if that translates into a little electoral practicality. But given the debate so far on policy issues and other things, I'm not sure it will.
Brian, in the election, how high up on the list will be gun control as an issue?
Well, you know what's interesting, going back to what Alex said, using these debates can be a great opportunity for some of the lower candidates to really make some noise. The danger there is if they make a little bit too much noise. And I think a really good example is what Beto O'Rourke said about, we're going to come and we're going to take your guns. I mean, this has been such a delicate conversation. It's been such a delicate line that Democrats have to walk here when it comes to this issue of gun control. And I fear that in saying that, that is a quote that the Republican Party is going to use against Democrats, not just in this election, but for the next 10 elections to come. It's a shame to me that both sides of the aisle here cannot, at the very least, talk about red flag laws. I think red flag laws should be the law of the land in all 50 states. Because of what Beto O'Rourke said, I really have a feeling that now Republicans and a large majority of swing voters are going to be so scared off by what he said that we're not even going to look at red flag laws, which is a terrible shame.
Alex, how do you feel about the gun control issue?
Look, the further away that issue can stay from electoral politics, the better chance that Congress and this president have at actually doing something. In a way, ironically, the way to actually do this, whether it's around red flags or something else that can be agreed on, is to pre-cook it, especially in the Senate, and say, we're going to have a vote on this thing. We're not going to have a bunch of amendment votes that are only designed to put the other side in a bad position. We're going to have a limited amount of debate, and we're going to go up or down. The problem is it is too attractive, politically speaking, for people to use as a way to beat up on the other side. And frankly, it scares both sides away from really wanting to do this. If you're Mitch McConnell, there's not a lot of incentive for you to force your members to take votes that you know are not going to either lead to or even designed to lead to a policy change. We'll see if there's the ability to come to agreement among the leaders. But the further away the 2020 folks stay from that particular debate and legislation, it's probably better for the potential prospects.
Alex and Brian, we thank you for your time today. Always great talking with you.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate it.